اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن وليك حجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آله في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك الله وتمتعه فيها طويلا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا عبد الله. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا خيرة الله وابن خيرته. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد المسيح. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والبتر الممجود. السلام عليك وعلى الأرواح التي هلت بثنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله بدرا وبقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. يا عبد الله يا عبد الله. لعن عظمة الرثية وجمل عظمة المصيبة بك علينا وعلى جميع الإسلام. وجلد عظم المصيبة في السماوات على جميع السماوات. فلعن الله أمة أسست أساس الظلم والجور عليكم أهل البيت. ولعن الله أمة دفعتكم عن مقامكم وأزالتكم عن مراتبكم التي رتبكم الله فيها. ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم. ولعن الله المهمين لهم للتمكين من قتالكم. فرأت على الله وإليكم منهم ومن أشياء وأتباع وأولياء. يا أبا عبد الله يا أبا عبد الله. إني سلم لمن سالكم وحرب لمن حاربكم إلى يوم القيامة. ولعن الله زياد والمال. ولعن الله بني أمية قاطبا. ولعن الله ابن مرجون. ولعن الله عمر بن سعد. ولعن الله شجران. ولعن الله أمتان أسرجا والجبل متنقبا بثالث. فأبي أنت وأمي فمن عظم مصابيبك. فأسأل الله الذي يكرم مقامك وأكرمني بك أن يرزقني طلب ثارك مع إمام منصور من أهل بيت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم اجعلني عندك مجيئا الحسين عليه السلام في الدنيا والآخرة يا أبا عبد الله يا أبا عبد الله إني أتقرب إلى الله وإلى رسوله وإلى أمير المؤمنين وإلى فاطمة وإلى الحسن وإليك بمراتك وبالبراءة ممن قاتلك ونسبك المال وبالبراءة ممن أسس أساس الظلم والجور عليكم وبرأ إلى الله وإلى رسوله ممن أسس أساس ذلك وبنى عليه بنيانا وجرى في ظلمه وجره عليكم وعلى أشيائكم برأت إلى الله عليكم منهم وأتقرب إلى الله ثم إليكم بموالاتكم وموالاة وليكم وبالبراءة من أعدائكم والناصبين لكم الغم وبالبراءة من أشياء وأتباعهم إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم وولي لمن والاكم وعدو لمن عاداكم فاسأل الله الذي يكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أولياءكم ورزقني البراءة من أعدائكم أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة وأن يثبت لي إنكم والمسلمين في الدنيا والآخرة وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله وأن يرزقني طلب الثاني مع إمام هدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم وأسأل الله بأمركم وبالشأن الذي لكم عنده أن يعطيني مصابيبكم أفضل ما يعطي مصابا مصيبة ما أعظمها وأعظم مزيتها في الإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض اللهم اجعلني في مقامي هذا ممن تناله منك صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة اللهم اجعل يا محمد وآل محمد ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد اللهم إنا ضائع تبركت به بنو أمية وابن آكلة الأكبار اللعين ابن اللعين على لسانك ولسان نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله في كل موطن وموقف وقف فيه نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله اللهم لعن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية عليهم منك اللعنة ومن العابدين وهذا يوم فرحا به يا زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله عليه اللهم فضاعف عليهم اللعنة منك والعذاب الأليم اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي من في هذا وأيام حياتي بالبراءة منهم واللعنة عليهم وبالمباراة لنبيك وآل نبيك عليهم السلام. اللهم لا نقبل طالب بل معك محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع ولا ضالين. اللهم لعن الإصابة التي جاهدت الحسين عليه السلام وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا وتمرا. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي هلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بغيت وبغي الليل والنهار ولا جعل الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم خص أنت من ظالم باللعن مني وابدأ به أولا ثم الآن الثاني والثالث والرابع. اللهم لن يزيد خامسا والعن عبيد الله بن زياد بن مرجان وعمر بن سعد وشمرا وآل أبي سفيان وآل زياد وآل مروان إلى يوم القيامة. سجدة. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين لك على صابرين. الحمد لله على دين رزيتي. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم القيامة وثبت لي قدم صدق عندك مع الحسين واصحاب الحسين الذين بذلوا ما جهلوا من الحسين عليه السلام. محمد وآل محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. صلى على محمد وعلى محمد. اللهم صل. Inshallah, we will continue with the recitation of the Holy Quran by Sister Aliza. Please welcome her with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm going to recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Next up, we have Brother Kaysen, who will be doing a presentation as well. Please welcome him with a salawat. Ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm going to be reciting this poem that I found. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hussein's candle of light, who glows both in day and night, guiding us all to the right. To Karbala we want to fly. Hussein is the savior. He is sinless. He's the pure. He will guide me, and he's the cure. I'll knock always at your door. You are so close to my heart. From it you will never depart. I will hold on to your rope, for you are my only hope. Without you I'll never cope. Guide me to the narrow road. Let us board Hussein's ship. Let us head for the best trip. Guaranteed you'll never slip. Those left behind will never win. I'm ready to go through much pain. Let them all call me insane. As long as I am with Hussein and following Allah's lane. On the eve of Ashura, the whole world is in azab for a man who is so great, for our master, the Hussein.
So again, just a couple of reminders as always. There is a children's program going on at the same time during the lecture in the spruce room. So it used to be in the room over here. It's moved down to the room further down the hall. So inshallah, please, let's make sure our kids are either sitting with us in the program or they are benefiting from the children's program. Inshallah, I'd like to welcome Sheikh Reza at this point to begin the lecture. Please welcome him with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Let's begin with a Fatiha. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين إنه خير ناصر ومعين. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين وحجته على الخلق أجمعين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الناس قد جاءكم الرسول بالحق من ربكم فآمنوا خيرا لكم وإن تكفروا فإن لله ما في السماوات والأرض وكان الله عليما حكيما. Dear brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We have been discussing these past few nights this ultimate mission and message of the Prophet that the Ahlul Bayt carried forward and symbolized and signified for the Muslim Ummah after the passing of the Prophet, and that is the mission of Haqq. Last night, we began talking about the khutbah, this khutbah al-Qasi'ah in the Nahj al-Balagha, khutbah number 192. And we talked about one of the main themes of this khutbah, which is about asabiyya, this type of factionalism and blind tribal loyalty that existed when the Imam was giving this khutbah, and how the Imam describes this factionalism and this blind loyalty in terms of the pride and the arrogance which is at the root of it. And the Imam explained that this pride and arrogance and the factionalism that it leads to in terms of its origin with shaitan. Now, I want to make just a additional point, and that is Islam and the Imam here does not forbid having loyalty to a tribe or having loyalty to, say, a culture or a language. Islam, in fact, if the Prophet wanted to, he could have forbidden having any sort of tribes, naming a tribe, or even having even love for a tribe. But in fact, we have ayat of the Quran that talk about these differences among people, different languages and different peoples themselves, as a sign of God and as something that points us back towards God. And so when we look at this prohibition, this admonishment of the Imam against asabiyya, it's not against asabiyya in terms of loving or even identifying. Or even loving and being close to one's family, one's language, or even one's culture. Loving even one's nation. Whatever way we want to identify ourselves, Islam doesn't necessarily prohibit having loyalty to one's homeland, but there is a certain priority that is given to Haqq, our ultimate loyalty as Muslims, and in particular as followers of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali, is to the Haqq. And that is the ultimate loyalty that we must have, the ultimate thing that we must take pride in. Now, we've talked about this word Haqq in the past few nights. We said that Haqq has a number of different meanings. On one level, Haqq talks about rights. When Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali, says that my Haqq was taken away from me right at the death of the Prophet, once the Prophet had passed away, until this very day, that Haqq, the Imam is talking about a particular right that he had. And yesterday we talked about Haqq not just in terms of a right and a responsibility in the face of that right, but we talked about haqq as well in terms of certain virtues, certain things that we must desire. So for example, justice in our society, goodness and graciousness that we must present to other people, certain things that we must do and certain ways we must be. So haqq as well talks about being good and being true, certain things that we must inculcate and grow within our own character. So haqq also has this meaning. But there's also another deeper meaning to haqq, and that is about existence, being. Haqq ultimately talks about what is. And to further elaborate on this, let's look at the khutbah of Amir al-Mu'mineen in the first line of this khutbah of Al-Qasi'ah. The Imam states the following. He says, Alhamdulillah alladhi labisa al-izza wal-kibriya واختارهما لنفسه دون خلقه وجعلهما حما وحرما على غيره واصطفاهما لجلاله. The Imam begins, as is the conduct and the habit of the Imam, but more importantly, as the message of the Imam requires, by praising God. He says, praise be to God who has donned this cloak, has worn the garb of glory and honor. And he has chosen these two characteristics, chosen these two traits for himself. And he has forbidden it, set it as a boundary and forbidden it for any of his creation. He has chosen these two characteristics of honor and glory for himself. Now, again, this is a habit for any khutbah. Many times, even in my own khutbah today, begin with praise of God. Alhamdulillah. But when the Imam talks about praising Allah, he begins by describing for us an essential part of the reality of these two characteristics. He talks about it in terms of the reality of what kibr or what kibriya and iz are in their deepest sense. When we are, as followers of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali, we are trying to get at the depth of existence. We're trying to make ourselves deeper and deeper human beings, trying to understand the message of Islam and not just understand it in terms of certain concepts, but we're trying to create those virtues that Islam calls us towards within ourselves. And our entire lives are to be dedicated towards deepening that sense of truth and that sense of haqq within ourselves. That's what our ultimate mission is, not just to understand certain things, but to make those things thrive within ourselves. And then once we have cultivated within those virtues, that goodness and that justice within ourselves, then we can allow it to thrive within society as well. I'd like to present just a question in terms of, since we are talking and since this khutbah is primarily focused on this vice of kibr, of arrogance and pride, I'd like to ask a question that is very prominent in our society. And that is, well, in our society, we see quite a bit of moral and virtuous people. There are a lot of people who do good, a lot of people who refrain from injustice, a lot of people who call for justice in this society, and yet they don't believe in any religion. They don't really have any strong belief, or they are against religion. A lot of times even, religion is seen as a source of evil and destruction of society. This isn't just in our time, but even during the Prophet's time, the munafiqun, one of the calls of the munafiqun, one of their justifications for their nifaq and their hypocrisy was, we are going to express this religion so that society can be in order, so that we don't create a division and we don't create corruption in the land. We're trying to create a cohesion and a unity within society. If we present the fact that we don't believe, then what's going to happen? Then society is going to split apart. Right? So religion is seen as, in our society and in other societies, it's seen, in particular in our time today, it's almost seen as an unnecessary weight that's holding us back from being truly good. Now, what's interesting, in particular in our day, is that Islam is not just any religion, but in particular, Islam is seen as the worst of the worst, right? It's singled out for particular enmity or particular opposition. So for example, we can talk about dressing in a modest way. There's the current debate within the Olympics about dressing modestly, about this push to change the uniforms of the athletes. But then when it comes to the same debate in terms of Islam and Islam's call for dressing modestly, then no, this is not allowed in our society. This goes against the very foundation of our nationalism, of our pride in our nation. So this double standard exists not just for religion as a whole, although it does, but particular enmity, particular opposition, let's not call it enmity, particular opposition is given to Islam as, say, a force for taking us away from our cultural heritage. And there's many examples of this. I'm sure all of us face this in our own lives. Many times we might try to refrain from calling ourselves Muslim or even expressing certain rituals that we must abide by simply because we have this sense of, say, inferiority because we are Muslim. We have this identity, this label as being Muslim. And so the question becomes even more real for us. What is the role of belief in being good? Why is belief important? Why should we first and foremost believe in God, and then we look towards trying to become a good person? And inshallah, we can continue this with a loud salawat. Now, when we look in our society in terms of how people define what it means to be good, to be virtuous, to be morally upright citizens or upright people, the way that people, what the things that people value and the way people lead their lives, there are various different interpretations that different people give. One of these interpretations is that I follow myself. Right? I'm sure some of us may have heard this before, but they say, for example, I just heard this today actually. The person said, what religion are you? I said, Muslim. And then the person said in response, oh, okay, your religion is Muslim. Oh, okay, I'm the religion of me. I'm a religion of myself. I have my own path and my own ideas about how to be good. Be you is what they say. I'm going to be me and you be you. You'll be truthful to yourself and I will be truthful to myself. And a lot of times this presents itself in terms of how we speak, right? I have to be honest to myself. When we say, for example, that, you should do these and these things, you should say even cry for Imam Hussein because of all of these tragedies. Sometimes we might have this sense of insecurity. I don't feel like crying. This isn't who I am. And so we take a step back. This isn't who I am as myself. We talk about it in terms of calling things and calling ourselves as we are. I don't really care, to be honest, because that's not just who I am. Or even if I do care, to be honest, it's because I am how I am, right? And so there is this importance that's given to ourselves. And that's one of the ways that people will justify their own actions and just justify the way that they interact with others. Now, despite the fact that we can't really determine how to act and behave right based on our own selves and our own whims, but more than this, it's really also more interesting how we came to make those decisions about ourselves. There's a certain history to the way we perceive ourselves. There's certain, for example, social or political reasons why we identify ourselves in a particular way. So for example, I might call myself American, and so therefore I'm not Iranian. I might call myself of one nation, and therefore I'm not of another. Well, all of these things, all of these labels that I place on myself, these are all have a particular history. And much of these labels that I place on myself are not by my own doing. So on one level, when we talk about creating ourselves as we see fit, well, on one level, this is a total lie. We are fooling ourselves if we think that we are totally in control of what we are, of who we are as a human being. On another level, and on a deeper level, if we don't have a sense for what and where we come from, then we can't really have a sense of ourselves. Ourselves will change as the times change. As external factors come into my life, my decisions then will also change. And so we see that, for example, you'll decide that on one day you're doing one thing, on another day, maybe something else seems right to you. It brings about a certain stagnancy in our lives. It brings about a certain confusion. Now, in the end of the day, how can we really order a particular society based on the whims of an individual self? One individual wants to do one thing. He sees justice in terms of one, say, call, and another person sees justice in another call. Now, there's no real debates that we can have here. If the ultimate criteria that we place is ourselves, then there's really no debate that we can have with another person that this is what justice means. This is the thing that we must work towards. And so society, on one level, starts to break apart. Another way that in our society we see that goodness and justice is defined is in terms of the consequences of those actions. So for example, a particular action results in a certain effect. Now, this is, a lot of times we can see this in terms of charity, right? Charitable organizations. We see that we want to increase the level of efficiency. So for example, we do all of this research to see which charitable organization has the least overhead. Which charitable organization will, this money that I'm giving to them is going to reach the poor and those who are in need the most. And so we sometimes make these lists. These are the good charitable organizations, these are the bad ones, right? We try to think about the efficiency of our actions. What is the effect that this giving of this money is going to have on that person that I'm going to give it to, that poor and that indigent person. And so we try to increase that efficiency. One of the sources of this way of thinking is in terms of our valuing of certain quantifying of the world. Right? We see that, for example, say that this amount of money should bring about this amount of, say, goodness, or this amount of wealth in a person's life, this amount of prosperity. And so we try to quantify, we try to increase efficiency as much as possible. We try to look at the effects of our actions, and then we determine our actions based on those effects. Now, this has a place in Islam. There are ahadith, one hadith in particular that I'd like to cite here after a loud salawat. This is a hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam, where the Imam says, إن الله عز وجل جعل للفقراء في أموال الأغنياء ما يكفيهم ولولا ذلك لزادهم. God, this is about zakat and sadaqah, giving in charity. The Imam is telling us that if those who are wealthy, if those who are prosperous in society give the proper amount of their sadaqah, proper amount of zakat, if they fulfill their responsibilities that God has placed, then you will find that all of those who are poor in the society will have their needs met. And if that amount is not sufficient, so for example, the wealth of the wealthy, if they give their dues, is not sufficient, then God will increase the wealth of those who are prosperous such that he will meet the needs of the fuqara. What the Imam is saying is that we must fulfill our responsibility. And if we do that, then we'll see that our society slowly becomes a more prosperous society for all. Right? The mission of Islam is not to keep certain people poor and to make certain people wealthy. The mission of Islam is to ultimately have this prosperity shared. Now, in various ways, and that's beside our conversation right now. And so we see that efficiency does have a place, but it isn't the ultimate source of goodness and virtue. We don't come, for example, to these majalis necessarily to learn something new. We come to change who we are. And this is the third way that we understand what goodness is and what virtue is. Another way that goodness and virtue is explained is in terms of being a good person. Not just doing good things, but being a good person, being a virtuous person. And so charity then isn't just me giving to someone else. And for that person then to take that money and go and maybe spend it on their family or spend it in terms of their own lives. But charity, in fact, is an action that I partake in so that I can become a charitable person. This virtue, this habit can be created within myself so that I can become a charitable person. When I see someone in need, I feel a trouble, an anxiety within myself. I try to help that person as much as possible. If I don't have money, then I'll think about something else. And this is in fact one of the behaviors and the characteristics of the Prophet himself. Whenever someone would ask him for something, if he didn't have it, then he tried to figure out some way to be able to help that person. And if he couldn't figure out any other way, then he'd stay quiet. He would refrain from saying no to another human being simply because he had this sense and this characteristic within himself that he felt deeply for other people. And he cared deeply for other people. And so this is an important characteristic. Justice is good. And so we try to cultivate this characteristic within ourselves. We don't just do actions. We don't, for example, just give to other people or go towards certain calls for justice. But we do those things so that ultimately we can cultivate this behavior in ourselves. Now there's a good example of this in Islamic adab. I talked about this idea of asabiya earlier, this idea of loyalty earlier. But if we look in fact, if we think about many of our Islamic cultures, Muslim cultures that many of us grew up in, or we have some connection to, a lot of times we think about this idea of adab, right? There's a certain adab that you have with another person. Say if you have a guest come into your house, or if you have a new person in your community. There's a certain set of behaviors that you have to have, presenting them into your family, welcoming them. You maybe, for example, stand up for a person who has entered into the room. Or for example, you might, give them salams, you might give them your own seat. All of these adab that we might have in our Muslim cultures. Now, for a person, for example, some of our second generation Muslims who grew up in this society, a lot of these adab don't quite make much sense. Well, why are you paying this person respect? Why are you, say, for example, praising them when you don't really believe it? Why do you pay them respect when you don't actually respect them in the first place? So sometimes we see this as a sign of hypocrisy. But in fact, the wisdom behind this behavior is that despite the fact that maybe I don't necessarily care to stand up, or maybe I'm not that respectful of a person, but what adab does is that it tries to cultivate this behavior within ourselves. I stand up for a person. I've been trained as a young person to stand up when someone older than me comes into the room. Because even though I don't really know this person, this is a characteristic that I must cultivate. It is good, ultimately, to have adab. Now, whether we understand it, say, for example, when we are young or not, that's beside the point. We train our young to have this adab. This characteristic, this whole way of being, is very prominent in our Muslim cultures. And so when we talk about asabiya, when we talk about loyalty, this is in fact one of the good types of loyalty, right? When we are connected to those types of cultures, and we should try to instill those cultures and try to present those cultures in our children. And we should have them try to be more familiar with them, right? And adab, in fact, in Muslim cultures isn't just in terms of certain behaviors, but it's a whole literature and a whole way of being, a whole worldview that tries to instill these behaviors. Another, for example of this, in Farsi, we have this beautiful book of poetry by Saadi, where he says, Ayyuhan nas, jahan jan tanasai nist, mard dana be jahan dashtan arzani nist. Right? When we have this, all of these teachings in terms of all of these virtues, and one of these virtues is to think about not just how I am, what I am doing right now, but what type of life I want to live. Saadi here says that this isn't a world, when you, for example, when you think about what type of life you want to live, this isn't a world of just comfort and, say, certain luxuries. This isn't a world that you want to spend your entire life and just be comfortable and then that's it. When you are thinking about how to live your life, don't just squander it. Don't just give it away for something very cheap. But in this same literature, and when we think about this way of being, this idea of what it means to be good, it's not just doing good things, but being a good person, right? But if we separate this from belief, because ultimately you can be a good person, again, we began by saying that a lot of people in our society are good people. They're virtuous people, but a lot of them don't have any belief. But the question then becomes, how can you be a good person when you don't know where you are from? How can you be a good person when you don't know what being is, where existence comes from? And that's on one level. Where am I from? And if I lead a good life, where is this life going to end? Where is this life leading me? So I can be a good person, but this way of looking at goodness on one level is very limited. The question is, why am I a good person? And this way of looking at goodness, this way of looking at how to be just, then is a very limited way of looking at the world. On a different level, however, it's not just limited, but it actually takes away goodness from a person. There are many examples in Islamic history, but since we're talking about Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali, I want to give just one example from Imam Ali's own life. There were various companions who were alive during the time and the Khilafat of Imam Ali. One such companion, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, was known as one of the most pious and virtuous people of that society. He was a person who had, met the Prophet. He was known as being, very good companion, very good, for example, pious worshiper, did salat, saum, all of these things. But when the time came to decide between Muawiyah and Imam Ali, the time came to decide between the true and rightful Khalifa, the person who was the successor of the Prophet, and the person who was usurping this Khilafat. What did Abu Musa do? Not only was he indecisive, but he in fact corrupted all of those other people who saw him as being good. And so when we take goodness and virtue outside and away from that ultimate source of our being, that ultimate source of our existence, when we understand it separate from God and that guidance that God presents us, then all of that goodness and all of that justice and all of that piety that we have created within ourselves, all of it becomes for naught. It in fact ruins our lives and ruins the lives of other people around us. And so we have to not just understand haq in terms of of right action, of justice, but we have to understand it in terms of being. And that's ultimate source of our being. Another example of this is Abdullah ibn Umar. Again, various examples that we can give of truly pious people, or maybe, for example, some who were supposedly pious during the time of our imams. In this case, many people came to Imam Hussein when they saw Imam Hussein leaving Mecca and leaving Medina. They came to the Imam and said, "Oh Imam, oh Hussein, we care for you and we know you're standing in relation to the Prophet. You were his grandson and you were beloved. And because we don't want to see any harm come to you, take my advice. Just give this bay'ah and live a good life. And you can stay among the Muslims and you can teach them and you can give them all of the lessons that you had learned from your father and your grandfather. Lead a good life and give this bay'ah. This is just a small sacrifice that you can do." Time and time again, multiple different individuals came to the Imam to tell him, this path that you are undertaking is not going to lead anywhere good. And so just give this small sacrifice. Another person, if you want to contrast it, is Abdullah ibn Ja'far, the husband of Lady Zainab. Abdullah ibn Ja'far, when he comes to the Imam, he says that, "Oh Imam, I have asked Umar ibn Sa'd for leniency and for protection for you." There's a report that says that he says, "I've asked for protection for you, and so you are safe. Don't leave." And yet Imam Hussein responds by saying, "Thank you for your advice. This is a kind and brotherly advice, and yet this is a mission that I must go on." But when Abdullah ibn Ja'far saw that Imam Hussein had set his eyes on leaving, he had made up his mind to go on this path, he then gives and tells his two sons, Own and Muhammad, to go with the Imam. Once he understood that this is the decision of the Imam, he gives himself to that decision. He realizes that this is a call that the Imam must make. And so, Own and Muhammad follow the Imam. And their father had told them that whatever need the Imam has, you must fulfill. If it ends up being that the Imam must fight, you must defend him. I want to turn our attention to Lady Zainab. In fact, it is Lady Zainab who really saw the most difficult moments of the day of Ashura. She suffered the most, not only because she saw her brother and her Imam going out and carrying the individual bodies of his supporters, but she saw how lonely the Imam ultimately became. Lady Zainab, on the night before Ashura, as all of the companions of the Imams were gathered in the tent, she comes by the side of her two sons. All of the mothers are trying to spend these final moments taking care of their beloved sons, their brothers, and their fathers. The women of the camp were trying to spend these final few moments with those they loved the most dearly. And so it is said, and we can imagine, that Lady Zainab on that night comes by the side of her two sons and maybe caresses their head, maybe She takes care of them, asks them what they need and what they want, as a loving mother would, knowing that on the next day that she is not going to see her two sons ever again. And so Lady Zainab spends this night in this loving and compassionate way. But when the day comes, Lady Zainab comes out of the tent. We can imagine she looks to her left and she looks to her right. She sees the companions of the Imam lined up in a very short row. Ultimately, the companions of the Imam were just a few people. And then she looks across the plains of Karbala and she sees thousands upon thousands of enemy soldiers sharpening their spears and their swords, waiting for the call. Lady Zainab looks to Imam Hussein, and maybe she says, "Oh, Imam, is there anyone else who is going to come and help you? Is there anyone else who is going to come and defend your honor and the honor of the Prophet?" Imagine how lost Lady Zainab must have felt, how much of that tragedy is filling up in her heart. She knows what is going to happen by the end of the day. And yet she asks the Imam, is there anyone else who can come and help? The Imam knows that there is one final person who he is awaiting. Habib ibn Mudahir was one of the first people to call the Imam towards Kufa. And we can imagine Habib in those moments, he is restless. He doesn't know how he must approach the camp. He knows that he must go and defend his Imam. And so they see that out in the distance, Lady Zainab and Imam Hussein see that out in the distance, there is this flag coming towards the camp of Imam Hussein. And Imam Hussein, when Habib finally gets to his camp, Imam Hussein says, "Where have you been, Habib? I have been waiting for you." Maybe the Imam says, "Where have you been, Habib? Look at my followers and look at my companions and my soldiers. Is there anyone else who can come and help?" But the sacrifice that Habib gave cannot be counted. Habib goes out and he fights a brave fight, but yet Habib was an old man. And he had become weak with years of worship. And Habib finally falls. And the Imam comes to the head of Habib. And he brings him back to the camp. When Habib and all of the other companions of the Imam have died and have been killed, then finally it comes the time when Lady Zainab must give her own sacrifice. But when they look around, when Aoun and Muhammad come to the Imam and they ask the Imam for permission to go out and fight, and they fight their fight, and they fight bravely and courageously for the Imam, when they fall to the ground, it was a custom of Lady Zainab that she would be by the side of Imam Hussein when any of the Banu Hashim would fall. When any of them would be killed, Lady Zainab was the first to be by the side of the Imam. And yet when her own two sons fell to the ground, it is said that Lady Zainab was nowhere to be found. Maybe she was telling us, "Oh, Imam Hussein, when I give my sacrifice, I do not turn back." Maybe she was trying to make the Imam not feel so sad for her, not regret the sacrifice of her two sons. And And Lady Zainab gave her sacrifice. And it is said, when the caravan goes towards the gates of Sham, as they are paraded around the different cities, it is said that when we think about this relationship of a son to his mother, of a son to his father, it is said that there was a child that was following the caravan. And it was following the head of Habib. It is said that there was a child who was following behind the person who was holding the head of Habib. You think about sacrifice. When this man turns around and looks at this child, he asks him, "Why are you following me?" He says, "That head you are holding, that is the head of my father. Hada ra'su abi, this is the head of my father." We think about this sacrifice, but then we think about the sacrifice of Lady Zainab and Imam Hussein in Sham. Another head was given to a child. The head of Imam Hussein. What must Lady Zainab have felt when she saw Ruqayya holding the head of her father, caressing that head, kissing that head, laying her own head upon it? What must Lady Zainab have felt when she finally saw that Ruqayya gave her final breath? وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ.
Lashkare Hussain, Izabre dashte nena amir. Lashkare Hussain, Izabre dashte nena amir. Lashkare Hussain, nehange ful Sune Baba Amir Lashkar Hussain, Qadange per kache paza. Amir Lashkar Hussain, Barange Shah Lafta. Amir Lashkar Hussain, Amir Lashkar Hussain, Wafadar Mojiza. Amir Lashkar Hussain, Izabre dashte nena amir. Lashkar Hussain, Izabre dashte nena amir. Ye zulfe taab hai nahi, ye sher be shahe najaf. Ye tego tez bhashani, शान जुर्रत सलब हर कमर कज़े नजर कफील तशनगान तफ कनार अलकमा तमाम फौज का हदफ किसी से पैर न रुक सका अमीर लश्कर हुसैन की ज़बरदस्त नैना अमीर लश्कर हुसैन की ज़बरदस्त नैना अमीर लश्कर हुसैन सब शिकन में इस जरी के तज़किरे दिलावरान देवान में इस जरी के तज़किरे हर एक वफा की अंजुमन में इस जरी के तज़किरे रसूल पाक के चमन में इस जरी के तज़किरे हुजूर आलम मुस्तफा अमीर लश्कर हुसैन की ज़बरदस्त नैना अमीर लश्कर हुसैन की ज़बरदस्त नैना अमीर लश्कर हुसैन का हुसैन का गुलाम भी हुसैन की सिफर भी है मुतबर भी है हुसाम भी हुसैन की ज़रा भी है अमा भी है सिहाम भी हुसैन हुक्म दे अगर तो शिम्र से कलाम भी बगैर नवा पुजा अमीर लश्कर हुसैन की ज़बरदस्त
قشنگی این که زندم دوباره ماه غمت رو دارم میبینم چه حس قشنگی این که زندم دوباره ماه غمت رو دارم میبینم چه روزیه با برکتیه این که اجازه میدم تو روزه هر شب بشینم چه روزیه با برکتیه این که اجازه میدم تو روزه هر شب بشینم ما سینه زن شدیم با دعای تو که یه خوشبخت‌تر از سینه زنهای تو ما سینه زن شدیم با دعای تو که یه خوشبخت‌تر از سینه زنهای تو هم پای توه دل جای توه جنت که میگم پای توه هم پای توه دل جای توه جنت که میگم پای توه اربابم حسین 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 اربابم ارباب حسین ارباب اگه کربلایی نداشتی چیزی نداشتم غیر از تباهی غیر از تباهی اگه این حرم رو نداشتی میمردم آقا از بی‌پناهی از بی‌پناهی میفروشم ریشم و اشک غم میخرم من با بهایش صد ماتم میخرم میفروشم ریشم و اشک غم میخرم من با بهایش صد ماتم میخرم دنیا به حسین عقبا به حسین چی بهتر از این که آقا به حسین دنیا به حسین عقبا به حسین چی بهتر از این که آقا به حسین ارباب 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 حسین. The ark of salvation, you're the light of Allah, my beloved Master, Ya Abba, Ya Abba, Ya Abba, Ya Abba, the ark of salvation, you're the light of Allah, my beloved Master, Ya Abba, Ya Abba, Ya Abba. Look at me, oh Mola, giving arms for you. Look at me, oh Mola, giving arms for you. The key to the Jannah is having love for you. Ya Abdullah, Ya Abdullah, Abdullah, Ya Abdullah, Ya Abdullah, Ya Abdullah, Ya Abdullah. The land of Karbala is the peace of heaven. The land of Karbala is the peace of heaven. Since the dirt is mixed with the blood of Hussein. Ya Allah, Ya Abdullah, Ya Abdullah, Ya Abdullah, Ya Abdullah, Ya Abdullah. مظلوم شهید انشان مولا یا بی عبدالله یا بی عبدالله یا بی عبدالله یا من الطاهر يا من الزهراء يا من الهدى يكرم تنوى بعد الزهراء بعد الأهدى قلبي كفى طول الغدا نورا ذاتا دلم ترسم بماند آرزوی کربلا تشنه آب فراقم ای عجب مهلت بده یا بگیرم در بغل شهید حسین جانم 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 حسین الهی و وفا الهی و وفا سكينة إلهي وسكينة يا زينب يا زينب يا زينب يا زينب يا زينب يا زينب يا زهرا 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 هيدا أمير المؤمنين 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 روجة الإحسانة السلام عليك يا مولاتي يا فاطمة الزهراء شب جمعة شب زيارتي يا بابا الله امشب ما بر پهلو شکستش میاد کربلا آی هرچه سرود محتشم زینب و حسین دریافت کرد از قلم زینب و حسین بازی چه نوحه و چه عذاب و چه ماتم است در زیر سایه علم زینب و حسین سرای قدسیان خانه برزانی غمست هر شب به یاد قدر خم زینب و حسین شب جمعه جای محرم عباد الله خانی امشب بین الحرمین چه صفایی داره اسمك نبي من أقام بزينب الكبرى وبحق بابا عبد الله المصري يا الله 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 يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مغلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك واكفنا يا غافي الرجاء ويا كافي المهمات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك غافر الذنب الخفي إنك على كل شيء قدير بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم من يجيب الضر ويكشف السوء من يجيب المضطر ويكشف السوء من يجيب المضطر ويكشف من يجيب المضطر ويكشف السوء من يجيب المضطر ويكشف السوء رحم الله من يقرأ الفاتحة مع الصلوات
receive this mic one. Inshallah, we're going to continue with the recitation of Dua Kumayl before our prayer. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي ما امتلأ كل شيء وخضع لنا كل شيء وظلنا كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبتنا كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي يحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك الرسل اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النبات اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب اذنبته وكل خطيئة اخطأتها اللهم اني اتقرب اليك بذكرك واستشفع بك الى نفسك واسالك بجودك ان تثنيني من قربك وان توزعني شكرك وان تلهمني ذكرك اللهم اني اسالك سؤال خاطر متذنب خاشع أن تصالحني وترحمني وتجعلني باسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا اللهم أسألك سؤال من اشتدت طاقته وأنزل بك إن الشدائد راجته وعظم فيما عندك رحمته اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانه وخفي مكرك وذال أمرك وغلب أمرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار منه
اللهم لا عجب لذنوبه غافرا ولا لغبائه ساترا ولا لشيء من عمل يبقى فيه من الحسن مبدلا غيرا لا اله الا انت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي وظلمت وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي مملك علي اللهم مولاي كم من نبي سترت وكم من فاضح من البلاء ملت وكم من إنسان مميت وكم من مكروه دفعت وكم من سماع جميل أصبح له نسلت اللهم أعلم بلائي وأفرت بي سوء فأسرتني أعمالي وبعدتني أقدامي فبسني النبي بعد عملي وخذتني الدنيا وبرودها ونفسي بجنايتها ومثالي يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك الله يسوع أمثالي وسوء عملي لفضالي ولا تفزعني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سرك ولا تعجبني بالعقوبة لا عملت من سوء فعلي بإساءتي وتمام تفريطي وجهالتي وكسبي شهواتي وغفلتي اللهم بإذنك فيكم من أحوالي أوفى علي في جميع الأمور أحوفا لا وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضربي من نظر في أمري اللهم مولاي أجزيت علي ومن اتبعت في هوى نفسي ولما درس من فيه من تحسين عدو فغنني دماء أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء وتجاوزت ما جرى علي من ذلك فأذى ونبت بهذا أمرك ولك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى به فزاه والزمني حكمك وبلاغك وقد أتيتك يا لا باب تفسير وإسراف الله نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستغيثا مستغفرا بيبا مغرا مدنا لا أجد مفرا مما كان فلا مفزع توجه إليه بأمره غير مقبول كوني مالك يا أبي سألت رحمتك اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من سدي وصامي يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني رفقة جلبي ورفقة عدلي يا من بدأ خلقي ذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي أبدي لاقتدائي كرمك والصالحين بالنادي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي راك معذب بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد من تواليه من قلبي من معرفتك والعجبي لساني من ذكرك بعد فتح ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي وضعف عظم من ربوبيتك هيهات ان تكرموا من ان تسيئ من ربيت او تبعد من ادنيت او تشرت من عابيت او تسلم على البلاء من كفيته ونعمت ولتشهر يا سيدي المنايا ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا فعلى سنتك بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مالها فعلى بلوغ اعترفت بلاهيتك حقك فلا زمان رأبت صارت عاشرة فعلى جبارها سيدنا وطاني تعبدك طارئا فأشارت باستغفارك يا مضينا ما هكذا الذنوب فلا أخبرنا بفضلك يا كريم يا رب يا كريم يا رب أنت تعلم الذي عن قليل بلا الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها اللهم ذلك بلاهم نمك كليم لك يسير مبون مسير مستقر مالي لملا الآخرة وجليل النمو المكارم بها مهوى فله تكون مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا مزبك وإقرارك وسببك وهذا ما نعلم الله السماوات والأرض يا سيدي بكيف لي فأنا عبدك الضعيف ذليل حميد مسكين مستكين وربي وسيدي ومولاي لا ينقول إليك أشكو ولما من أهل وأبكي لا لي من عذاب وشدته أملك للبلاء ومدته ولئن سيرتني للعقوبات ما أدانك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أبوائك وأوليائك يا إلهي والسيد ومولاي وربي سهرت على طابك وكيف أسكن على فراقك وأبني سبرت على نارك وكيف أسكن عن النذر إلى كرامتك وكيف أسكن في النار ورجعتك وبعزتك يا سيد ومولاي اكفر صادقا لئن تركتني نعتبر لا زدتني ليس بين أهل عادتك العاملين ولا سبحان إليك صراط المستسلمين ولا أبكين إليك أبكاء الفاقدين ولو نادين كيدكم يا ولي المؤمنين يا غاية الأعمال العارفين يا غياث المستمعين يا غياث المستمعين يا غياث المستمعين
يا غياث المستغيثين يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاقت عن عذابها بمعصيته وهبس بين أتباطها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يضج إليك لجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب ويرجو ما سلف من حلمك أم كيف تعلمه النار وهو يعمل فضلك ورحمتك كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوتا وترى مكانا كيف يشتمل عليه صفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفها أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم سدها أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب أم كيف يرجو فضلك في إثمه منها فتتركه فيها هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك فباليقين يقتو لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاهدين وقضيت به من إخلال معاندين لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقر ولا مقاما لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقدمت أن تملاها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأن تجل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا تتولت بالإنعام متكرما أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حكمتها وحكمتها واخترت من علي جريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة في هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمت وكل ذنب أذنبت وكل قبيح أسررت وكل جهل عملت كتمت أو أعلنت أخفيت أو أظهرت وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارهم وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترت وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلت أو إحسان فضلت أو بر نشرت أو رزق بسطت أو ذنب تغفر أو خطأ تستر يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي يا من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورا وبخدمتك موصولا وأعمالي عندك مقبولا حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وهالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي يا من إليه شكوت أهوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب قوي على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العزيمة جوانحي وهب لي الجد في خشيته والدوام في الاتسال لخدمته حتى أسرى إليك في ميادين الصادقين وأسرع إليك في المبارزين واشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين واذنو منك ذنوب المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين واجتمعا في جوارك مع المؤمنين اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فارق ومن كادني فكر واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك واقربهم منزلة منك وحسن زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجد لي بجودك واعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما يا علي بحسن إجابتي وأقلني أثرتي واغفر زلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتي وأمرتهم بدعائهم وضمنت لهم الإجابة، فإليك يا ربي نصرت وجهي وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع يا سريع الرضا، اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء، يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء، يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النعم، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بما أنت أهله، وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا.
I checked with Mary. She said she's gonna bring them or they're how are you? She's okay. Yeah.
سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين علي ولي الله أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين رسول الله حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله أستغفر الله أستغفر الله أستغفر الله الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربي الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله الله أكبر الحمد لله حول الله قوته وقوته بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر الله أكبر اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب حق محمد وآله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله أكبر الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وتقبل شفاعتك وارفع درجتك بحول الله لا قوة إلا بالله. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله.
Samaya.
صلاة العشاء. الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله عليه الصلاة والسلام حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله استغفر الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربي الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله الله أكبر الحمد لله بحول الله وقوته بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر الله أكبر اللهم صل على محمد وآله اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء تاب الله بيننا وبينهم إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك على كل شيء برحمتك يا أرحم اللهم صل على محمد الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وتقبل شفاعتهم بحول الله يقول الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. بحول الله وقوته يا أرحم الراحمين. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله. سبحان الله. سبحان الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله. أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر.